So over the last week, I've been on redpoint attempts on a hard sport project down at Arica, and I think I'm getting pretty close, but all my attempts have been failures. I've been dealing with wet holds and rubbish weather and all these other problems, but one thing that I'm not worried about is being nervous before the attempts, so I thought I should make an episode about that. I just don't really get nervous before attempts on projects, whether that's on trad or sport or boulders. And that hasn't always been the case. I did used to get nervous, and that did used to cause me to mess up lots of attempts. But I've got lots of weaknesses as a climber, but these days nerves aren't one of them. And I've been asked lots of times to explain why this is and what my secret to it is. And sometimes when I've actually been asked by climbers how I deal with nerves, they flat out told me that they just don't believe me when I tell them that I don't get nervous in the first place. So in this episode, I'll explain the two simple reasons why I don't get nerves. One of them is something that I think, and the other is something that I do, and I'll lay them out now. But I just want to emphasize first that I think it's the raw simplicity of those two tactics that I employ that is a big part of why they're so effective. So here's the thing that I think. It's just an attempt. That is the simple mantra that I say to myself before any attempt on a project. Many years ago, when I was first learning to discard my redpoint nerves, I would actually say this to myself inside my head in a kind of explicit way. And now I don't really need to voice it quite so directly as a mantra. It's just a feeling, like I don't need to say to myself, I'm going to get out of bed when I'm getting out of bed in the morning. It's just a thought. It's not really something that I say to myself in words, if you know what I mean. So although I actually don't say it out loud, I do think or feel it every time I start up a hard route, especially when I've got thoughts or projections of how that attempt is going to go. So maybe I'll think it's just an attempt when I'm driving to the crag, or maybe it'll be when I'm pulling my rock shoes on at the foot of the route, or maybe on the lead up to the crux, or maybe on a rest before the crux. But why is that mantra so effective for dissolving pre-climbing nerves? I think the effectiveness has got two strands to it. And the first is that it just lowers the stakes for any given attempt. So you might be thinking, well, maybe it doesn't apply in poorly protected trad climbing. Right, Sparkle, come on then. Right, come on. What are you saying? Right, you mad cat, I'm trying to make a YouTube video. So yeah, it just lowers the stakes for any given attempt. Maybe it doesn't in trad climbing where there's not much protection, and that is a special case which is covered by the second tactic, which I'll come to in a second. So I'm going to park trad for a minute and just think about the nerves that come from attempts where climbs that are actually safe. Right, away in the house. See ya. Oh, right, sorry about that. Saying it's just an attempt recognises the fact that the climb is still going to be there tomorrow. Reminding yourself of that simple fact just diffuses a lot of the tension without doing anything else. Okay, so maybe it's really good conditions today, but good conditions will happen again. They really will. Or maybe it's like the last day of your trip and you might have to come back on another trip. But is another climbing trip really so bad? So I'd like to pause here and make an important caveat to what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you need to be all zen all the time, or that you need to deny your feelings of disappointment when you don't send your project on the last day, or when you felt like you've really earned it. Absolutely not. I can tell you that as a pro climber, I get very intense about the attempts that I have on my projects, and they really matter to me, and when I fail on them, it's a really big deal. But it's precisely because hard climbing is so important to me that I know that I need to get this right, and I can't abide nerves stealing my successes on my projects. So what I'm saying is that you don't need to let that kind of deep desire to succeed turn against you in the form of nerves, and because that just makes sure that you fail. It's absolutely okay to feel really intense emotions of disappointment with failure or lack of progress on your projects, but if you take that apparently negative feeling and then you combine it with the recognition that you don't have to hang all of it on this single attempt, then I find that it kind of transforms into something completely different from nerves. It transforms into a willingness, well, I find this anyway, to fight on this attempt and to be kind of fearless rather than defensive. And that, I would argue, is exactly what you need on a hard project. And here's another caveat. What about on-site climbing, where the on-site really does hang on this one attempt? And to me, this is really quite simple. If you're going to get upset about a single on-site attempt on a given route, then you're going to find climbing a very frustrating business. It's just not a strategy that's going to work very well. You might really want to on-site that particular route, but the fact is you might not. And thankfully there are many more routes that you can try afterwards. And I think experience really helps here, just getting out and racking up both lots of successes and failures on many, many routes starts to make any single route seem a bit less important. Now that mantra, "it's just an attempt," is my mantra, and you might wish to make your own version of it. I don't think there's any right or wrong words for it. The right mantra for you is going to be the one that allows you to enter the crux of your route without thoughts of the future beyond what you've actually got to focus on and do right now. So to me, the mantra, "it's just an attempt," appeals to my personality, and it might not completely align to yours. So let me kind of dig into that for a minute. Lots of you comment on this channel that I appear to have a very calm and relaxed demeanour, and that is true, I think, for at least one side of my personality. The great thing about climbing is that it allows me to express multiple sides of my personality at the same time. So yeah, hard climbing is a sport that rewards the ability to think very clearly and calmly under duress, and I've spent a long time trying to cultivate the ability to do that, and that does probably come across in the way that I speak and act. But hard climbing also rewards the ability to deliver a real explosion of neural drive from your brain to your muscles so that you can latch a hold and not let go. And that requires a very focused form of aggression. So when I'm standing at the start of a project and I inwardly say, "it's just an attempt," it calms me down, it dissolves the pressure, but it also brings this response from another part of my psyche that says, this attempt isn't going to be just anything. When the right moment comes on the crux of my route, I'm going to unleash everything I've got. And so it brings out this kind of instinct for aggression and explosive delivery of force that I honestly didn't really know that I had before I was a climber. So this simple 4-word mantra can simultaneously make me calm and relaxed, but also primed to explode with effort. It's really fantastic. It works perfectly for me, and I would encourage you to try it. And if it's not quite right for your personality, then just adjust it, just experiment. So did you spot the second strand of why the mantra works in that last bit that I was talking about? What really happened when that other part of my psyche says, this attempt just won't be just anything, it's going to be a really, really good attempt? It cut off the connection between a single attempt on a climb and a wider value judgment about me as a person, as a success or a failure. It refocuses my train of thought away from thoughts like, I want to be a 7A climber, or why do I keep failing under this pressure, or whatever narrative your brain is running. And it comes back to what you're about to do right now, which is climb a sequence of hard moves. Take the crimp, take that, do that. The wider picture of how you view yourself as a climber can wait until later on when you're on the journey home from the crag. So it takes this big chunk of heavy thoughts that you might otherwise carry up the attempt with you, and potentially sabotage your attempt, and it just discards them. You just leave them behind at the foot of the route. And that's not all the cognitive load that you can discard, which brings us to the second tactic, which is the thing that I actually do. And if you thought the first tactic was kind of simplistic at 4 words, this one is even more simple with just one, which is preparation. So many climbers just drown in nerves on hard attempts for the simple reason that they are unprepared. Preparation and nerves are like this self-fulfilling cycle which you can run in either direction, and you can choose which direction. So some climbers avoid preparation because they're nervous about what that involves, and the lack of preparation then leads to more nerves, and the cycle just makes it worse and worse. So here are some examples. You might be nervous about how you feel on the run out through the crux, and that's a clear case for preparation. You need to address how you're going to tackle the run out. What is the fall going to look like? Can you adjust the rope work to mitigate it? And can you take practice falls to gain familiarity? Should you force yourself to work the moves on lead so that you don't reinforce familiarity with the top rope? That climber might be scared of the run out, so they start to work the moves only on the top rope. And so they gain the knowledge of the moves, which is a good thing, but that's valuable preparation. But at the same time, they are de-preparing themselves for the lead, getting more and more nervous about the prospect of leading because that is increasingly unfamiliar. And maybe that leads them to then tell themselves a story that they'll practice the moves more and more and then lean on that aspect of the preparation instead of the other aspect that feels a bit less comfortable. And if the route's not at your limit, you might actually get away with that approach, but it's not a long-term approach to achieving your potential in climbing, or just doing something that truly is at your limit. You know, a lead attempt on a truly hard project is the final product in climbing. You've got to deal with all of the difficulties in one go. The leading, the hard moves, the remembering the moves, it all has to work perfectly. But the great thing about climbing is that you get to prepare for that lead, that final product, piece by piece. So if you just cherry pick the parts of the preparation that suit you, then you've got to deal with the bits of the preparation you avoided at the most demanding moment possible, which is actually on your red point attempt. And that just makes things unnecessarily difficult. You know, it directly will cause, you know, cognitive and emotional kind of overload when you're climbing, and then that leads to nerves, and then that will lead to failure. So instead, you can just run the cycle the other way and tackle the uncomfortable bits of the preparation in small chunks earlier in the process. The other really common form of lack of preparation that causes nerves is just simply not knowing the sequence. If you're red pointing, just work the moves really thoroughly and memorize them. Make sure you've memorized them. It's such a simple thing to say, but I've regularly seen even professional climbers fail to memorize the sequence and know it inside out, especially the foot sequence. And some people are always going to be better at this than others. So if it comes naturally to you, then just get into the habit of being thorough with it. And if it doesn't come naturally, then try to adopt a strategy, and ideally several, that help you to memorize moves. You know, that might be something like chunking the sequence into sections that run from bolt to bolt, you know, working each one separately and then rehearsing it out loud before and after you've actually done that sequence. It's really good to just play the sequence back in your head after your session, and as much as you can really, until you know it inside out. And if you come up against a roadblock in the sequence where you can't quite remember one move, then go back to that move and really prioritize it on your next try so that you fill in all the gaps. And the more that you do this, the easier it gets to actually think in that way. And then you arrive at this point where you just never feel this weight of uncertainty because you can't recall every single move for the whole pitch. You know that the chunking means that each section is going to reveal itself as you come to it. And so that dissolves nerves by just lowering your cognitive load, and that frees you up with it frees up bandwidth, if you like, in your mind to deal with little mistakes and errors that are going to come as you're actually climbing. You know, you never get an error-free attempt. So if you're going to beat yourself up about mistakes, then it's going to get really difficult to be a good climber. Some mistakes will be big and they'll cost you the attempt, in which case just have another one. And some mistakes are going to be minor and will make very little difference. And small mistakes can even help you on an attempt if you can use them to flip into an underdog mindset. Of course, there's a million other ways that lack of preparation creates uncertainty, which then creates nerves. And it's going to be up to you to continually observe all the hurdles that you encounter as you're actually trying projects. First, by assessing whether you've actually understood the limiting factor correctly. For example, does your foot slip because your footwork isn't precise, or are you just rushing it, or is the foothold wet, or is the foothold dirty? And then once you've established that, think of countermeasures to mitigate that problem, and you experiment and test them to see if they actually work. And then if you do that, you enter this cycle of progressive preparation where there's less and less left over to actually be nervous about. So I mentioned earlier that trad climbing is a special case, and it is a bit more complicated. And as you know, I've made lots of videos already about preparing yourself for trad leads, and if you missed those, then maybe you haven't pressed the bell notification on your subscription. So just so that this episode doesn't get too long, I'm just going to make two quick, simple points about nerves in trad climbing. The first is that there's an important separation between nervousness that I'm dealing with in this episode, which is caused by poor preparation, and the nerves that are caused by fear, fear of falling and hurting yourself. Fear is important, and like nerves, it's protective if it's dealt with properly. It offers a warning about uncertainty and about your safety, and it's a signal that you've got more work to do, so don't ignore it. But listening to fear doesn't necessarily mean backing off the climb or getting stuck in this state of fearful nerves. It might be that you just need to do a bit more reading of the situation you're in to realise that you actually are in fact safe, such as recognising that you could down climb to a safe position to test your gear, or other things like that. You know, I've made lots of videos about practical tactics. The main thing that I wanted to say here is that I don't get nerves in trad for exactly the same reasons I don't get nerves in bouldering preparation. I do get fear in trad climbing though. Fear drives preparation, which in turn dissolves both fear and nerves at the same time. So let's conclude this video. Where you end up, hopefully, if you employ these tactics, is you're stood at the foot of your project, ready for your attempt, with quite a clear and detailed picture of how it's going to go. If the route is going to be within your limits, but close to your limits, then it's going to be a mistake that's going to blow your attempt. And on some routes, you might need a little bit of luck to catch a hold accurately or something. If you miss a hold or you do make a mistake, well, that's human and that's probabilities, and thankfully you can just try again and again. It's just an attempt. If there's something else that's niggling you about the route itself, such as you can't remember whether to use that foothold or that foothold, then on this attempt, you'll just have to pick one. And if it was the wrong one, then you can use the other one next time and you can learn and iron out that sequence and memorize it for subsequent attempts. If it's a deeper discomfort that you're feeling, such as, you know, will I succeed on this try? Am I really good enough? Then I always just come back to that same simple mantra of saying it's just an attempt, and I exhale and start climbing. So that's my routine, and I find that usually what happens is that as soon as I start to move, then I just completely forget about all of these concerns and I just become lost in the moment. So it works very well. And so the next thing that I'm conscious of is that I'm hanging on the rope, having fallen off, and I'm saying, oh well, I'll have another go later. You can... Aye! Or I've succeeded and I'm at the belay and I'm thinking, let's just start all this again on a new project. Okay, so we'll see you in the next episode. And by the way, if you subscribe to this channel, then thank you, I appreciate it. Also, I mentioned before that I've made lots of other videos on preparing for trad leads, which I haven't focused on much in this episode. So here's one on mental tactics for trad, and here's another on more practical tactics. And if you've got ideas for other aspects that I haven't talked about on this channel yet, then I'd love to hear them in the comments. And I'll see you next one.